The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata, and that means make it real in our life. That means not just knowing about it, not just knowing it, but that it transforms everything we do or say or think to enlightened activity. This is something that we all have the capacity to do, and may we all complete that work, however many lifetimes it takes. Today is the third day of this June 2020 sesshin, mostly by Zoom because of the coronavirus in Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. And I'd like to speak a little bit more about how to work with stuff that comes up, essentially emotions. There's, as has been mentioned before, there's ancient Tibetan teachings about this that are incredibly effective when we put them into action. Putting them into action requires attention and awareness. However, a prominent psychotherapist has recently said, presence, being present, being 100% here in this moment, just as it is independent of conditioning. In other words, when we are truly present, we can be free of the conditioning that we've all developed as we were growing. And this is a vital thing for all of us, because usually we assume that all these feelings that we have are not only fixed and permanent, but real. And they're not. It's like the changing weather. And if we know how to work with it, then we become free of whatever emotion it is. At Hidden Valley Zen Center, which is at the moment a sister sangha of Mountain Gate, although it will eventually become independent, there's a scroll that was brushed by one of the Kancho, which is the head abbot of Myoshinji, which is a major headquarters temple for Rinzai Zen in Japan. And that scroll says, though the 8 winds may blow, it is not disturbed. And whatever our practice is, whether it's mu, whether it's searching for the original face before our parents were born, whether it's simply just doing the breath, whether it's the sound of one hand, it does not matter, even if it's subsequent koans. It's the same. We are searching for that it. The thing is, we're searching, it sounds like we're searching for it somewhere else, but it's not somewhere else. That so-called it is our true nature, and it can never be lost. And we can open to it. And the degree to which we open to it makes a difference in how much freedom in our lives we experience. It's an ongoing exploration of the nature of mind and all the kinds of things that go on in our mind. And dealing with emotions, particularly difficult emotions. And many people are experiencing a lot of difficult emotions right now because of the constraints of the coronavirus pandemic. And let me share with you some of the words again today of Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, who was an amazing human being and a Dzogchen master, and the father of a number of Dzogchen masters, which is kind of amazing. He had, I think it was 3 sons, but I'm not sure. It may have been 4. And each one of them is a teacher in that tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. So again, I'm sharing from this book as it is. And this is a chapter 5, entitled Transmuting Emotions. And here's what he says. Whether the emotion is desire, anger, jealousy, pride, or dullness, the principle of liberation for each of the 5 poisons, these are called the 5 poisons. And of course, that's not the limit to all the gamut of emotions we can have, which are also considered poisons, but for the sake of brevity, we kind of lump them into 5, and these are the 5: desire, anger, jealousy, pride, and dullness. The principle of liberation for each of the 5 poisons is exactly the same. The nature of mind in all these situations is always unconfined, empty cognizance. Unconfined, empty cognizance. A knowing without somebody being there to know. Without any being. There is simply emptiness, but it's a rich and amazing emptiness, and it is cognizant. And this is why you can move about life without having to think all the time. Because there's an aspect of your being that doesn't depend on thought. Only we don't realize that most of the time, because we are in our education and in our society, we are taught of the primacy of thought. And that is perhaps helpful in terms of helping people learn how to study and think, but in terms of living an open and easy, in terms of not troubled life, it can complicate things. If cognizance were confined, then all its qualities would be obstructed. And this is not to be confused with the confinement in essence that we have in place now because of the threat of the virus, where we're asked to shelter in place, to wear masks, and so on and so forth. This is a different kind of confinement. If it were limited, is really what it means. If cognizance were, let's say, limited, then all its qualities would be obstructed. Confinement is similar to unconsciousness, to being hit on the head with an iron rod. All that happens is that you black out and are unaware of anything. The moment of recognizing your mind is not an unconscious state. The moment of recognizing your mind is not an unconscious state, but it's not a thinking state. It's a state of becoming so present in that cognizant emptiness that suddenly you recognize. And in that recognition, depending on how deep it goes, you become free of being dragged around by the nose by things that happen. The moment of recognizing your mind is not an unconscious state, yet it is impossible for any normal, disturbing emotion to remain within it. When you enter emptiness, cognizant emptiness, if it's empty, how can there be anything there? And yet it's such an alive presence. Even to call it cognizant emptiness is putting a fence around it. It's far beyond that. And each of you can open to that experience, and it is phenomenally freeing when you do. The moment of recognizing your mind is not an unconscious state, yet it is impossible for any normal, disturbing emotion to remain within it. Once again, please understand that there's no difference between how any of the 5 poisons vanish. When you recognize the indivisible, empty cognizant, the emotion dissolves. What is left over is original wakefulness. Here is a quotation from Padmasambhava. When the thought of attachment towards a desire object occurs, do not suppress or encourage, but release into naked, aware emptiness. Without clinging to bliss, experience is awakened from within. That is called discriminating wisdom. Again, when the thought of attachment towards a desire object arises. So we have a sudden emotion, an anxiety, an anger, whatever, doesn't matter. Any one of the strong emotions, or any emotion for that matter, but the stronger ones are the ones that we want to either hang on to or get rid of. And what you do always is go into your body and feel the energy of that moment. As another Tibetan text says, before karma has been created. In other words, before you've acted out on it. You tune in to the energy that experience of that emotion is creating through your body. The churning guts, the tense shoulders, the icy chest, and whatever it is, tune in and feel it as fully as possible. And the more fully you can experience it, the more free you will become of it. It takes practice, as you've heard so many times. It takes a lot of practice. It takes commitment, because we are all so conditioned to not feeling these things, to chasing them away, to blocking the experience. And yet that just keeps it locked in our bodies and locked in some background of our mind, where the next thing that happens that is similar adds to the pile, and eventually we can explode if it's anger, for example. And it's because we have not opened to the experience of those difficult feelings each time they've come up. When we do that, they can simply dissolve. It's amazing to experience. Once you've got the handle of it, it is an amazing experience. And you find yourself motivated to use that again and again and again. In my own life, I had suppressed anger tremendously because I had a very, very volatile mother. And the last thing in the world I wanted to do was be like her. I was afraid I'd go out and murder somebody, because it felt sometimes like she would murder me. And so I suppressed it very, very well. And one of the problems with suppressing any feeling is that you can't feel other feelings. If you're suppressing one, it's not an individual choice. You're either suppressing or you're not suppressing. And if you're not suppressing, and you have been suppressing for a long time, and suddenly are able to begin to learn how to and activate what I just mentioned, this ancient teaching, which is also a relatively recent psychological discovery as well, a psychotherapy discovery, then all of a sudden you're like go from a foggy gray film to vivid technicolor in terms of emotions, and it can be kind of intense in the beginning, But over time, it gradually dampens down and becomes more normal. And the amazing thing is we're not caught. We're not caught. We have experienced a level of freedom through our own work. And that allows deeper work to take place in our practice. It makes so much difference in our life. So much difference. Each time we encounter whatever the difficult feelings are and use that way of working with them, tuning into the most minute sensation in our body that would be represented by that. Definitely staying out of stories, out of history, out of our heads, and just going into our bodies and being so totally present. Then, as Pat Ogden says, it's independent of conditioning. We're not caught. We're not stuck. We can become free. And the teaching further says exactly that. Basically, tune in to the experience of the energy of that poison, if you want to call it. And in the first moment, before karma has been created, then rest in the presence of that energy. And it dissolves into clear liberation. And I definitely paraphrase that, but this is what is taught, and you can realize it. And as I said, realizing it makes going deeper in your practice and getting so much closer to true liberation, because that's a huge boulder in the path. It's a whole mountain, really, in the path of practice for people who have that kind of conditioning. And most people do these days, at least in our society. So to continue, let's first repeat Padmasambhava's words. When the thought of attachment towards a desired object occurs, do not suppress or encourage, but release into naked, aware emptiness. In other words, tune in, and it's naturally released into naked, aware emptiness. Without clinging to bliss, experience is awakened from within. This is called discriminating wisdom. When your mind is moved by desire, don't cling to pleasure, but simply recognize its empty essence. And that sounds a little intellectual, but that's about the best I think he could describe the process that I just described. Recognizing its empty essence. You do that, again, by tuning into your body and feeling the energy of whatever that challenging emotion was. And in that, naturally, its empty essence is recognized. The view is self-existing wakefulness. Self-existing means empty, while wakefulness is the cognizant quality. The self-existing wakefulness that is present in all beings, everyone, no matter what we think of ourselves. The self-existing wakefulness that is present in all beings is exactly what all the great masters in the past have pointed out. Recognizing it is the basis of the path. Knowing it frees desire and all the other emotions. When we have had an experience where a difficult feeling has dissolved, and there is left, even in the midst of the feeling of it, a spaciousness in which we are not driven to react, to escape the feeling, but we have found ourselves in a deep level of awareness where naturally we understand how to respond to the situation, so that it's not about going into denial. If somebody makes us furious for a good reason, and that can happen, and we're tempted to fight back, sort of knee-jerk react, then if we tune in to our body and allow ourselves to be with that energy surging through our body. For me, when I first opened to anger, which took some work, believe me, it just felt like electricity running up and down my arms. It was quite exhilarating, and there was no felt need to go punch somebody. And instead, we can understand intuitively how to respond in a way that will be far more effective. There's a very interesting true story when Harada Roshi died. That is, there are so many Harada Roshis. There are at least 4 of them actually in Japan. 3 of them dead. One Harada Sekkei just died just a few days ago, as a matter of fact. And he was at Hoshinji, where Kepler-roshi trained. The abbot that Kepler-roshi trained under at Hoshinji was also a Harada. He is known more by his Buddhist name, Daiun Sogaku Harada, or Daiun Roshi. And then there is his Dharma successor, who was also Harada. And then there is the current contemporary master, Harada Shodo-roshi. This self-existing wakefulness that is present in all beings is exactly what all the great masters in the past have pointed out. Recognizing it is the basis of the path. Knowing it frees desire and all the other emotions. And so, to continue with that story, the current Harada Roshi, before he was Roshi, when he was still in training at in Kobe at a monastery under Yamada Roshi, he was leading a work detail outside the inner gates of the temple, but they were still on temple property. And apparently there was a group of homeless people. And this was told to me by someone who was actually present in that experience. The homeless people felt that the temple was somehow cheating them out of water, which is interesting because Japan is so full of water. But at any rate, the leader of the group, who, as the person that told me the story said, was no stranger to violence, came up to Harada, who was clearly the person that was leading the group, and literally in his face was threatening him, yelling at him, screaming at him, extremely threatening, to the point where the person that told me this story said that he had been holding a shovel and he kept it in his hands instead of continuing to work in case he needed to whack the guy if he took a punch at Harada. What happened with Harada Roshi, who in those days was called Dosan, was that he became inwardly deeply quiet, increasingly deeply quiet. And the man was raging, of course, right in his face. But somehow that deep quiet influenced that man. And he began to calm down and become quiet himself. And I don't know what the upshot of the situation was, other than the fact that apparently he had said what he wanted to say and didn't have anything more to say, and left with the group that he was with. Harada Roshi didn't say a word. All he did was stand there, looking straight in the eyes of the man, not in anger, but in honor. And it made an enormous difference in the whole situation. Had he been reactive, it would have been very different. Most likely a fight would have broken out. But he was able to so tune in to whatever emotion might have been going on in himself that it completely diffused the situation. And each one of us has that capacity, but it takes work to get there if we are caught in stuff. And, a lot of us are. So to continue with Urgyen Rinpoche. In the Dzogchen way, to recognize mind essence is to meet the indivisible three kayas face to face. That's the kayas are the Dharmakaya, the Sambhoga kaya, and the Nirmana kaya. These are different manifestations of a way of seeing reality. The essential point is to know how to recognize empty awareness. The essential point is to know how to recognize empty awareness. And we do that not by trying to find it, any more than we search for Mu or their original face by trying to find it. We tune in because it's not outside somewhere. We're not going to find it on the internet or in a book or in our head. But we can realize it through letting go of all of those connections and daring to disappear. And this is a very frightening thing for people, to start to disappear. This has been mentioned before, because it's essential prior to awakening. It's a prerequisite, really, to awakening, to let go so completely that you forget yourself, that in essence you disappear. It's something that initially has to be sort of stepped into gently and carefully, because it can be quite frightening to disappear. We can think maybe we won't ever come back to reality. Maybe we will die. How will we know how to function in life if we've disappeared? There's a great deal of anxiety around this process, which is part of what lies behind the challenge in practice. At some deep level, we understand that we have to let go of who we think we are, what we think we are, the whole self-identity, in order to find out who we really are. And we can put up a lot of roadblocks to that process. Many, many years ago, and ironically, it happened when I was getting relatively close to being passed on my breakthrough koan, I went to sesshin, as I did every single possible sesshin at Rochester. I was training at the center back then. And on the seventh day, it's like all the oomph went out of my practice. I found myself almost literally in a desert, nothing to hang on to. And this was not a positive experience or a positive mind state. It was in essence, a dissociation. And I struggled through the last day, relieved that the sesshin was over. And of course, dutifully signed up for the next sesshin, and always did. Somehow I understood that there was not going to be anything outside myself that would ever free me from the pain and suffering I'd experienced so much in my life, except to go in. And there was something that I could realize if I went in enough. So I signed up for the next sesshin. I was accepted. I went to the sesshin, and the same thing happened on day 6. So now I had 2 days of slogging through the Sahara Desert. And the next sesshin, it happened on the 5th day. And I began to see a kind of a thing going on here. And so I thought, I need to talk to Mitra-roshi and find out what I can do to make a difference. And so back then, you had to go through Mitra-roshi's secretary, who at the time was Bowden, who's now the abbot and has been the abbot of Sogenji or of Rochester for many decades, actually. And you always had to tell the secretary what you wanted to talk to the Roshi about. So I explained what had happened and said I needed to ask the Roshi for advice. And so Bowden said, okay, I'll relay this to him and get back to you. And so he relayed it to Mitra-roshi, and the answer came back a couple days later that Roshi would not see me. Since I was accustomed from early childhood to just dealing with stuff on my own, as there was no help from other quarters, I thought, okay, here's one more example of I'm just going to have to figure it out myself. And so then, of course, I signed up for the next sesshin. I'd already done that. And the deadline date for the sesshin applications in Rochester, a day or so after that, always there was posted a list on the bulletin board in the front entrance who was accepted to that sesshin. And for the first time ever, in all the sessions I had applied to, I was not accepted. And my heart sank. One of the things that I had thought when those treks through the Sahara took place was, I don't want to come to awakening. I don't want Kensho. Well, when I saw that my name was not on that list, that I wasn't going to sesshin, that I'd been rejected, I realized how much I did want to break through and be free of all the hell I'd been going through my whole life. And thankfully, the next sesshin, of course, I applied to, and that one I was accepted to. And it wasn't long after that, very soon after that, actually, that I was passed on my mukon. But the closer we get to having some insight, the more we can throw dust in our eyes, the more we can shoot ourselves in the foot, the more we can throw up blocks to interfere with our process, our progress. So know that. Practice is not easy, but if you persist, it will be so worth it, so worth it. And often, as the saying goes, it is darkest before the light. It's as if in our practice, at least the image that comes to me, is that it's like slogging through a swamp. You're in a jungle, and there is this swamp full of alligators and poisonous snakes and clinging vines and flesh-eating plants and all kinds of stuff like that. And you're struggling through the quicksand or whatever it is. It's a new thing all the time. But eventually, you keep plugging away at it. And there's something about that work that hones us and polishes us and lets go of a lot of the conditioning, the products of the conditioning that have caused us so much pain and suffering. And eventually we come to dry land and out into a different place in our mind and in our life. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. I think here about Flora Courtois, who was a college student, right? Her first year at University of Michigan was the year before the market crashed. And somehow her family was able to scrape up enough money, and she was able to get scholarships and do jobs for local families and so on to make ends meet so that she could continue her studies. And she had been questioning, what if there is? What is it? Is there a truth that underlies everything? So there's always true, no matter what the circumstance. And as she got into college, this became a real important thing for her. And she found herself just absorbed in this question. And she tried finding the answer in books. She tried finding the answer in different courses. She took a lot of different kinds of courses in an attempt to find the answer. And eventually she had a major breakthrough. Such an insight, such an awakening experience that 20 years later, when she finally encountered Zen master, it happened to be Mitra-roshi, and tell him what happened to her, describe it, he felt that he didn't even need to test her, because it is important to be tested ordinarily, unless someone has had such a deep awakening experience that it's quite obvious to the teacher, without a doubt, that it's not a charade. And he asked her to write her story, and it was eventually published in by Quest Books, which I don't know if it still exists, but the book doesn't exist anymore in that form. And when she died, goodness, I think it must be 10 years ago at this point, she willed the rights to the story, the book, to ZCLA, where she had done a full training under Mitra-roshi. She had actually completed the entire koan curriculum there that he taught, and he had actually asked her to teach, but she declined. I met her when she was in her early 70s, and she was an amazing woman, lively, alert, present, despite the fact that she had asthma, serious asthma, and had to do some lung work for a couple hours every morning just so she could breathe. And she also was an avid tennis player and had worn out the fat pads on the bottoms of her feet. So she was having to have different kinds of surgeries to help correct that. So she was dealing with stuff like we all do, but she was clearly so free. And it's because she had absorbed herself so much, so deeply. One of the things that was transformative for her before she had the Kensho experience was, she called it, what was it? It was an experience of sort of a transcendental experience. She felt she was working in an office. And I think she was still in college. Yes, I know she was still in college back then. And it was in this gray building, kind of nondescript building. And everybody was doing their nondescript work, manipulating colored blocks at little gray desks and gray cubicles. And at some point, for some unknown reason, she turned around in this gray room and suddenly saw that there was this big, huge window on the behind her. She hadn't even realized. that there was such a thing. And looking out, there was this amazing vista, and the window was open, so she could step through it into this glorious Technicolor valley filled with life, a bubbling brook, and mountains in the distance, and butterflies and birds and life burgeoning. And it was so exciting. She turned around and went back in the building to tell her teammates. Discovered as soon as she stepped back into that gray room, she had no words to explain, to describe what she had felt, what she had experienced. By the way, you can read her whole story in the, I think what ZCLA finally did was they did a revision of a book that they had published some years earlier called Hazy Moon of Enlightenment. And if you get the latest version of that, I think it's one of the last chapters is called An Experience of Enlightenment, and that is her story. It was terribly encouraging to me. All the time I was working on that pesky moo. So we all have stuff that is catching us, pulling us this way, pulling us that way, creating havoc in our lives. Here and there, some pleasant times. And then we try to hang on to those and prevent the difficult ones from coming back. But it's like trying to prevent the clouds from flowing in the sky and being unaware that there's this brilliant, clear sky that doesn't hold on to anything and doesn't need to hold on to anything. It is our true nature all the time. So you've had some instructions in how to work with at least the difficult emotions. And that also works for just day-to-day presence. The more totally present we can be, again, to quote Pat Ogden, presence is independent of conditioning. When we're truly present, there's no way we can be caught in our conditioning. But we're so accustomed to not being present, to being sort of present, not fully present. And so we keep struggling. There is a way out, and it's built in. And instinctively, you know that there is. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here sitting. You can become free. Your innate compassion and wisdom can function 100% instead of at whatever lesser percentage they're functioning now. It just takes a lot of work. But oh my, such fascinating and rewarding work, even the difficult times. So keep going, keep questioning, keep working deeper. Don't try to think your way through it, because that doesn't work. Intuit your way through it. Feel those feelings, not as, okay, I'm angry, but again, my chest is feeling really cold. It's feeling like I've got steel bands tightening. I can see this glistening steel. And I have a headache. And it feels like my eyes are going to pop out of my head. And my stomach is churning. Go there, feel it 100%. It's amazing what can happen when you really, really do feel it 100%. So I thank you very much for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.